I don't know that anyone could consider Michigan's offensive explosiveness to be jaw-dropping over the last few years, but considering the effectiveness, the results are obvious over the last 3 years, and especially a 2023 national championship run. But a new guy is at the helm in regards to both on the sidelines and under center, and we will talk Michigan offense with Nelson Hubble from Maize and Blue Review. Nelson, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I guess we can start right there with J.J. McCarthy. He moves on to the NFL. There's a lot of debate as to whether he should be a top pick or if he's just somewhere in that 15 to 20 range. When we look at the guys vying for the job, there could be also a debate as to whether Alex Orji is going to be that guy or whether they need to go to the transfer portal or what needs to be done. So what are your thoughts as the guys have just started spring practice?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the transfer portal, we'll just get that out of the way. There doesn't seem to be a huge interest from Michigan. If some big name were to pop up and something was to happen for whatever reason here, maybe they go and look at that guy. But right now, you mentioned Orji, but the way they're approaching it is they're starting with the vets. The oldest guys are going to be getting first team reps mostly, and then you'll work your way down to how many, who gets what. So that means a guy named Jack Tuttle, who we talked about last time. It might have been the last time I was on here. Definitely one of the last few times I've been on. I mentioned how Tuttle was applying for his 7th season, and I didn't think he was going to get it. Frankly, the NCAA, though, not a lot of what they do makes sense, and Tuttle got his 7th year, so he's back. There is a shot that he starts. I kind of lean against that, and in a video that Michigan posted, it was either yesterday or the day before on their social media, Alex Orji was handing off to Donovan Edwards in the video. So take what you may with that. Donovan Edwards is the clear-cut number 1 back. That might be just, one snippet that, he was just getting some of his first-team reps in, or maybe Orji is taking more of those first-team reps, even as a guy who isn't, as old as Davis Warren or Jack Tuttle are. So you work through the list, right? Tuttle, oldest guy, 7th year. Davis Warren, I think, probably in his 5th year. He's 4th, maybe. He's, redshirted somewhere in there. And then there's Jaden Denegal, Alex Orji, same class. And then Jaden Davis, true freshman coming in, highly touted true freshman quarterback. So they're all going to compete. A lot of the talk seems to lean Orji or Denegal right now.
We've seen a lot more of Alex Orji than Denegal. How would you size them up? Is this going to be a situation where, depending on who they select, they're going to have to change up the offense and alter it based on that selection, or how similar are they?
Completely different players. Absolutely different. So Orji, as we know, we've seen as a runner for Michigan, completely very unique in that style, very good runner. I think that is, a part of the offense that Michigan will continue to use this year, whether or not Orji is the starter. And we could see, just like what happened with Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy, reps are split for the first few games going into the year. Who knows? But what Denegal brings is he's a better passer. He's more he's still a big guy. He's 6'4". He's a tall guy, but he's more of a pocket passer, and he's more developed as a passer than Orji is. At least is what it seems like. And not as good of a runner. He's mobile enough, but Orji is a dynamic athlete, and that is undeniable. He's got great arm strength. Denegal has pretty good arm strength as well. It's the accuracy issues and reining in that arm strength a little bit for Orji that we're going to have to see how he develops in that component, because he's such an electric player as a runner, scrambler, and he's just a big dude. I mean, he's big, strong quarterback who kind of is like physically like a running back. So having him back there, if he's able to develop his passing skills enough, that would be a very unique threat. And I do think the offense looks completely different with him at the helm versus with just about any other quarterback on this roster.
And as we've talked about, Nelson, despite Jim Harbaugh leaving the program, the way the direction has gone moving forward with Sharon Moore, they've kept about as much continuity as possible, which is a great thing. Kirk Campbell, of course, is very familiar with these quarterbacks. He's worked with them. So now he's going to be calling plays and running the show as an offensive coordinator. So that's a big plus. Has Sharon Moore stated at any point, this is what he would like the identity to be on offense? Or is it just going to be, hey, we've got a roster, we've got an offensive coordinator, we're going to play to our strengths and run whatever offense has been determined? Or does he really want to drive a vision for the offense going forward?
I don't think he wants to really drive a vision. And I think that's part of the way Michigan evolved over the last few years to being what they were. Their vision became the running game, but that was also what they were best at. And so that's, you do, offensively what you're best at. And I think a great coach, some coaches have great schemes and they recruit guys for their schemes. That doesn't seem like what Michigan's doing. Michigan seems like the type of team, like you hinted at, that's going to come in and want to shape their offense or shape what they do around the talent that they have. And so I don't think there's a specific vision, and maybe part of that. And I think they do definitely want to rely on the ground game still and ball control style offense. I don't think there's going to be major changes when it comes to, switching to like a spread or something like that. But they're going to keep it more pro style, and that is, that's their style. But at the same time, if you have a guy like Alex Orji, and they've been very open about it, you want to, play to your players' skill sets or call the games to your players' skill sets. So once we have an idea of who the quarterback is going to be, I think we're going to hear more about what those changes might be.
So Nelson, for you, in maxing out the abilities of Denegal and Orji, is Orji the better ceiling option just because of the running component, or is Denegal potentially that deadly of a passer that he could be just that good?
Well, ceiling is it's a hard way to frame it, because when you look at the ceilings talent wise of both those players, and by the way, we're not talking as much about Jaden Davis and Davis Warren and Jack Tuttle, who I think is probably just going to be the backup to whoever ends up winning that job. And I don't think Warren will win it, but Davis and Davis Warren and Jaden Davis. We're going to say this a lot. I have to say the full names to get keep you guys from getting confused. But when you're looking at those two guys, they have a shot as well. But between Orji and Denegal, who I lean towards, and I think we're generally leaning towards at Rivals, is Orji has the bigger ceiling. His ceiling is higher. He's a more talented player, physically more gifted. And so there's that. But what's the mental component, right? And so is his ceiling, developing, whether it's how he makes reads and how he, changes plays in the offense? Because JJ McCarthy had a lot of freedom towards the end of, his tenure at Michigan to do that. And I think Orji, we're going to have to see if he has that component. I think he's a really focused guy who works really hard, and I think he really wants this job. And so that helps. But the Denegal, on the other side of things, is just a more polished passer. And so his ceiling as a passer is also, very great. It's a very high ceiling, but the running component we've talked about, not there as much for Denegal. So I think it's just going to be who's going to be able to max out, by the end of spring. By the time we get into fall camp, the spring game's in about a month or so here, and we're going to have an idea then exactly what, who's going to start and who's playing the best, because we're going to probably see every quarterback out there playing, heavy snaps. And there's 5 guys that you got to try out. So they know what they have in Tuttle. I think Warren as well. The other 3, Jaden Davis, Alex Orji, Jaden Denegal, who knows? But I do lean Orji. I just think that what he brings is so dynamic. And at the college game and with Michigan's offense, you don't have to be a dominant passing attack. We've seen it now. It's been proved. If they can have a really unique rushing attack, running game that, it's not going to be triple option or anything like that. But what Orji brings to the table, not the same speed or elusiveness necessarily, not the same style as a guy like Lamar Jackson, but that capability of being able to be a dominant runner. And that would be just, absolutely unique. I'm not going to try and overhype him too much because, like I said, there's a long way to go for him to develop into that kind of guy.
We feature Big Ten media guests and also your calls on our Big Ten live show that comes your way every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern time over on the national channel. We got Nelson Hubble here from Maize and Blue Review. Please join his work there at Maize and Blue Review.
Mm-hmm.
Donovan Edwards, what is with this guy? So he's a 5-star coming out of high school. He gets some work behind Hassan Haskins and shows some good things in 2021, including as a pass receiver, which has been a consistent part of his game. In 2022, of course, he plays second fiddle to Blake Corum very capably, and then explodes at the end of the year when he's the man. And then he becomes this enigma for most of 2023.
Yeah.
And then at the conclusion of 2023, he once again becomes this dominant runner who rings up these ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, it's it was something we talked about all fall, was when is Donovan Edwards going to break through? It's going to happen. It's got to happen. When is it going to happen? And it didn't until the national championship game. And I think that this offseason as being the guy is going to be huge for him development wise. I mean, we've seen the talent. You've talked about it. I mean, the way he's exploded at the end of the last 2 seasons. And so I think it could be wrong, but I think he's probably going to be one of the top 5, top 10 backs in the country next year, because he's going to have the production. Michigan's going to want to run the ball, especially with him. And so Edwards, I think, is going to take that step forward and really fill that starting role to the degree that we think he's capable of. And with Tony Alford now, that you feel, if you're, watching Michigan and seeing the way that Alford's developed running backs during his tenure at Ohio State, that Edwards will take that step with him. Moving on from Mike Hart, I think they really loved Mike Hart. So that's too bad that, he left, but Alford's a great hire. So, you fill that place with a guy who's just as capable of a coach, maybe better. And so I do think Edwards takes that next step. And I think also a fresh set of eyes on his playing style and his game will be good for him.
So Nelson, looking at the rest of the running backs, and we've seen these guys in spots, in spurts, CJ Stokes, Khalil Mullings, and others, Benjamin Hall, who's back and who has shown you the most in limited work?
Yeah. So we'll start with Mullings. Well, I'll give you the rundown of who's back. Mullings is back. Benjamin Hall is back. Cole Cabana, who is more of a shifty speed guy, could see him spelling Edwards in the passing game a little bit more. He can line up out wide. And then you're bringing 3, or I guess you have 2 true freshmen, and then Tavier Dunlap, who redshirted. So Jordan Marshall is a very highly rated running back, battled between that 1 and 2 spot nationally this last year. He's from Cincinnati, a very, very consistent runner. Didn't catch as much out of the backfield until maybe the last couple weeks of the season. But Micah Capana, more of a guy who's same as Cole Cabana is, a little bit of a shiftier, quicker guy, catches more balls. So I don't expect to see him. I think Marshall has a shot to get some carries, but the 2 guys I'm looking at, and CJ Stokes, by the way, moved on. He's transferring. And so Khalil Mullings is going to be, I think, that guy right there with Donovan Edwards, power back. And then Benjamin Hall. Those are the 2 guys. And Hall is a very similar style runner to Mullings, big bruising guy, bounces off of tacklers. Hall looked really good in the spring game last year. We thought he might break through for some snaps this past season. He did a little bit, but nothing consistent. And Mullings, we saw in the Rose Bowl and even against Washington a little bit, catching passes. So they seem comfortable, very comfortable with Mullings as their number 2. I think that was a sign of it, because he's getting out and, doing things in the offense that we haven't seen from him. It was a lot of just up the middle, inside zone, power play, whatever, that's all he was taking was powers and inside zone basically. And then you saw him go out against Alabama in the Rose Bowl and catch a pass on the sideline, toe tapping, So I think they're comfortable with him. He's also great in pass pro, which will be huge because Blake Corum was so good at that. And Edwards is not as good. Not bad, but Mullings is going to be that guy who I think gets a lot of the second snaps. But Ben Hall's development will be key this spring to see if he steals some from either of those 2.
I will afford Michigan's wide receiver / tight end group the same courtesy as I did a few days ago when we talked Georgia, because of Brock Bowers' dominance, that you usually go through all the wide receivers. And then at the end of that position breakdown, you say, oh yeah, they got tight ends and this guy's the blocker and this guy's the receiver and that's who they are. but Colston Loveland's that good that maybe we'll lead with the tight end position, actually, because Colston Loveland, of course, AJ Barner was a key component last year. He's gone. But your thoughts about Colston Loveland and the tight end position, and then we can move into wide receivers.
I mean, Loveland, this is his junior season, so now he's really taking the lead role here. AJ Barner, he was still, I would say, the top tight end for Michigan last year, but Barner was a great tight end as well. Played very well next to each other. And so it's Loveland. That's the guy. And you're going to have to lean on him a lot because there's not a ton of depth, at least known depth behind him. When you start looking, you look at Max Bredesen, who's coming back, who's played fullback, a H-back sort of position for Michigan. You might see him line up at tight end a little bit more, maybe catch some more passes at least out of the backfield. Curious to see how that goes because Bredesen now is, an upperclassman. He's been there, done that, solidified in the offense, played a lot as a fullback, H-back slot type guy. And so those are the two that you know. And then you get into the unknown, which is Marlon Klein, who's going to be probably your next guy as a pass catcher, my guess. Klein comes in, he's 6'6", 250, big dude, 3-star recruit. He was like 215, I think, when he came in. And so he's developed, his strength and added some weight and gotten to a point where he feels comfortable pushing guys around, blocking, and also running routes. And so I think Klein is that next guy. It seemed like he was getting some snaps. And I think he'll be a good enough backup to Loveland. And then you start looking at who they have beyond that. There's not a ton, like I said, of proven guys. Deacon Tonelli is a guy that might get some rotation. I think Brady Pricegorn, who is from the state of Michigan, he's a very high 4-star recruit. Another guy who, like Klein, is coming in 6'6", 6'5", a little light at the 215 lean. I think he's probably up to 225 now, 230. So we'll see. Pricegorn has a chance. He's a great pass catcher. So that's where he might come out and play some of that slot receiver type position where Michigan has liked to line Loveland up at to spell him, and even if it's just late game snaps. So those are the guys I'm looking at. Pricegorn probably in the mix with a couple other guys. Hard to say if he'll actually win some significant snaps because he's a freshman, and especially at tight end, you can't get moved around. In the Michigan rushing attack, you got to be able to block. So there's some guys in there who are able to. Bredesen, one of them. Klein and Loveland, I think, are probably the top guys, the leaders. I'm curious to see how they use Bredesen. I look at him as a very similar player to Kyle Juszczyk capability-wise because he started as a tight end and they moved him to H-back, and he's a capable pass catcher. So we'll see how that position group shapes up. It's one of those where you have one guy, and beyond that, it's a lot of unknown.
Tyler Morris is the latest example of a guy with great ability, comes into the program, much anticipation, then he kind of gets lost, and I believe he was nicked up as well, and gets lost during the regular season. And then during postseason preparation and practices, he becomes a part of the offense, and then he turns out to make what is one of the biggest plays of the season to get even at the Rose Bowl against Alabama. Your thoughts about the wide receiver position, of course, with Roman Wilson moving on and Cornelius Johnson. And also, I got to think that Darius Clemens, who was kind of the next in line, it was difficult to see him go. And that was a bit curious why he would, with the tenured guys getting out of the way, that he would move on. But what do you see at wide receiver?
Yeah, so Clemens moves on. He's going to Oregon, which that is a tough loss because he's a big, fast receiver with a lot of talent. Never seemed to break through to get snaps like we thought he might, especially after having a good fall camp. But nonetheless, here we are. Tyler Morris is that top guy. We saw Samaj Morgan start to get snaps. That's about it. I mean, those are the guys that you've seen. Fred Moore is probably right there earning snaps as well this year. So Samaj Morgan is probably going to play the slot. He's a small guy. Might see him outside a little bit, but I'm expecting slot from him. Morris will play as one of your outside receivers. Fred Moore as well, I expect. But the other guy right there with him is Carmelo English, who we just haven't seen on the field that much, but everybody in the program keeps, and people who've gone on to the draft. I just keep talking about Carmelo English. Roman Wilson's mentioned him. Cornelius Johnson's mentioned him. All this pre-draft stuff, that you hear. And so you wonder, you're like, okay, well, where is his development? And I heard about him all, summer and fall last year, but we just didn't see him play that much. A guy we also heard about who got hurt quite a bit last year is Peyton O'Leary, who was a walk-on. And O'Leary sort of developed, carved a niche for himself before he got injured in fall. And so that's a guy who is a very possession style receiver, I think you would best call it. He's not like a super fast guy. He's not small, but he's not like a big dude either. He's just sort of is what he is. And I think he's a very sure-handed guy. So there's a chance that O'Leary actually breaks through as a veteran on the roster because he's been around. And O'Leary and Morris are probably the two oldest guys in that room. And then you're bringing in a couple true freshmen with Kendrick Bell, which is Ronnie Bell's younger brother, and then Channing Goodwin, who comes from where Jaden Davis went to school down in Charlotte. So Goodwin, I don't think will get snaps this year. Bell, both of them might really late game stuff, but I don't think either of them will get much. They're both really project receivers, but we're looking at Fred Moore, Tyler Morris as probably your top two guys on the outside, Samaj Morgan, and then Carmelo English and Peyton O'Leary right there, maybe battling for that outside spot with Fred Moore.
Another impressive aspect to this national championship run, Nelson, that just hit me as we prepare to talk about the offensive line is that this has been an offensive line leading team in this 3-year surge. The Joe Moore Award, this is what we do. We pound you, Hassan Haskins first, Blake Corum, on and on. This is what we do. This is our calling card. This is what we're known for. And this team had offensive line issues. And coming down the stretch against the better opponents had some offensive line issues that were very obvious. Carson Barnhart took on the brunt of the criticism and was the most obvious, but they fought through that of having, they didn't let it get to them in regards to, okay, what we're supposed to be known for and our strongest part of our team is showing weakness, but with the resolve of the defense and just putting things together and piecing things together on offense, of course, they worked through that. Now, of course, some guys move on. And your thoughts about the offensive line here in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing back one starter, kind of. Miles Hinton's coming back, who earned starting snaps last year. Josh Preby is coming from Northwestern, who's a very, very solid guard, and he's going to play right guard for sure. I think he's a guaranteed starter there and one of the best in the conference. And then Giovanni El Hadi, left guard. I think that is a guy that Michigan has known is very good for the last 3 years, and he just hasn't been able to break through because of Zinter and Keegan being there. And so El Hadi's going to get. I think this is the line I think is going to start. It's going to be Hinton at left tackle, El Hadi at left guard, center. I lean Greg Crippen because that's the way the team is leaned. But they brought in a pretty highly rated 4-star recruit, Raheem Anderson, as well in that same recruiting class, and they're both upperclassmen. And so whoever, maybe the physical component of the center position is important, but a lot of that is also the mental component, and whoever maybe takes that step, especially with a new starting quarterback and identifying different blitzes and different things like that, and different rushes from the defensive line and stunts and just communicating in general. I mean, that's huge. So that might be more important than anything at the center position. Talked about Preby, it's going at right guard. And then Andrew Gentry is who I think wins the right tackle job. And if you know anything about Gentry, I believe he was originally committed to BYU, and then he went on this mission trip, and he was gone for 2 years or something in that era. So he's an older player, but he was a very highly rated recruit, one of the top tackles in his recruiting class 4 years ago now, I think. And so now Gentry comes in, solidifies himself. I think he is probably the most talented tackle on the team. I know Hinton has the size and everything, but Gentry, same right there. Size, athleticism at right tackle. So I think he wins that job, but there are other guys who could. Jeff Percy is right there battling with Andrew Gentry, and then you're bringing in some guys who are either true freshmen or maybe some underclassmen like Tristan Bounds or Andrew Sprague who might compete there.
Breaking down the Michigan offense, Nelson Hubbles here from Mason Blue Review. Nelson, I'm going to set you up to give us a very generic answer, so do your best not to, but I apologize for the question because it just lends itself to being cliched answer.
Mm-hmm.
What is a successful Michigan offense going to look like this year? What is your best reasonable expectation of what this group can do?
Oh, that's tough because I think the passing game is going to be where they struggle the most, one way or the other, because when you're breaking in a new quarterback, that's just how it goes. And new offensive linemen. So usually offensive linemen are better in run blocking when they're getting their feet wet than they are at pass blocking. That's just how it is. So we'll see, if they can gel and they can get a solid group there on the line. And if that happens, that will definitely help the passing attack. But I think you can expect Michigan to be a run-heavy team again. Goals-wise, I'm not expecting anything crazy. I'm thinking they're probably going to try to play it pretty safe. I think it's going to be the type of season that we've seen from Michigan, maybe 2021 style, where you come in with McNamara starting for the first, solid starter for the first time after he played a couple games in during the pandemic, and you got a lot of unknowns. And so, you have Donovan Edwards, what you have in Kalel Mullings behind him, and even the depth with Ben Hall, like I mentioned. And so those are guys that you can trust, and also leaning on your offensive line to run block, because there are a lot of good run blockers on that line. It's going to be pass pro. That's going to be the concern. And then letting your quarterback ease his way into the year and seeing where he can go. Like we mentioned with Orji's ceiling, if he does start, it's extremely high. And so the progress that a guy like him can make throughout the course of his season is pretty incredible, because if he's able to develop that part of his passing attack, or a guy like Denegal, who is a very, very capable, very good passer as well, and very accurate. And so he has a chance too to come in and ease his way into the offense. And unfortunately, Michigan plays Texas and some very good teams early on in the season. Fresno State is no slouch either. And so that's going to be tough, but you lean on the defense and your running game. It's what's worked for them. There's no reason to get away from it. And so I expect an offense that isn't going to be super explosive in the passing attack, but will have a very good running game. Yet again, probably one of the three best in the conference.
So, Nelson, I'm guessing that the best news that you can hear coming out of camp, based on your observations, what video you're able to see, obviously there's limited access and so forth, outside of the obvious being the quarterback position, let's set that aside, would be that some of the guys that you mentioned along the offensive front, who are most likely the starters, have shown themselves to be proven or solidifying their positions, are getting their feet wet and doing a nice job. And then also maybe that somebody's emerging as a third receiver behind Morgan and Morris.
That's exactly right. Someone has to emerge at receiver as that third guy who, potentially could overtake Morgan for targets, potentially, because of just the position that they play. And then you're right on the offensive line. I think if you can come out of spring knowing those things, you feel really good about where you're at. If you get to fall camp and you're working through that, and then you know where you are after fall camp, that's just what you want. But if you don't, then you're figuring it out throughout the season, which it can be tough. But yeah, I think you hit a nail on the head right there with how Michigan is hoping this thing will shape up.